Over the weekend, there's a story that was published in newspapers. Nation had a headline: "Global firms want Kenya to allow homosexuality." It was quoting a certain report. We discussed this report on this show on Monday, and we said, you know what, we need to hear from the people who actually authored this report. The report is called "The Economic Case for LGBT plus Inclusion in Kenya." It was authored by Open for Business. It's an alliance, it's a coalition of global companies making the case that inclusive, diverse societies are better for business and better for economic growth. It has various companies that are members. And the country director for Open for Business joins us now in the studio. Her name is Yvonne Muthoni. Yvonne, good morning.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you.
Good to have you in the show. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Asante sana.
We're going to go into what these global firms are saying or not saying, and what your report is saying or not saying. But let's start by understanding who's Open for Business.
So Open for Business, like you said, is a coalition of 30 plus companies, multinational companies that are making the case for LGBTIQ inclusion, that want to advance LGBTIQ inclusion, especially in challenging markets such as Africa, where the law is not really supportive of same-gender, same-sex unions that are consensual. So these companies have seen the need to do this because in their global offices, they're very inclusive. But when it comes to challenging markets, and that's why we call them challenging markets, there's a bit of a challenge in having the company employees, staff feel included. Not everyone feels as included as they should be, especially if they identify as either a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, plus.
So there's a plus. Who does the plus represent?
There's
lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer,
questioning, androgynous. There's so many identities in which people can identify with. And so that is why the plus is there, because I can identify as...
and so on and so forth.
So would this grouping qualify in terms that I would understand, like, so they're a tribe?
No.
So what are they? Because it's a grouping that is identified in a specific way that other people are not identified by.
They can be identified. You see the way you identify as heterosexual? That's what LGBTQ is. You identify as a lesbian, you identify as a queer person, you identify as a questioning person, you identify as a polyamorous person. Yeah.
All that. Okay. So these organizations, the global companies, they came together and they said they formed this alliance. They joined this alliance. What is the aim of the alliance? Is it to lobby for change? Do we have same organizations, for example, joining another alliance on climate change, joining another alliance on human rights, joining another alliance on gender inclusion?
Yes. So they deal with so many spectrums of social inclusion and environmental inclusion and other factors that affect our environment, affect our society. If you look at companies like Google or Microsoft or Shell or whichever, there's so many other things they do. Shell will probably focus on the environment because, you know, the mining, the oil mining. Google will focus on internet. Google will focus on security. Google will focus on LGBTQ issues, on gender issues. So it's not that one company can only focus on one thing, right? They have many departments, and one of those departments happens to be diversity and inclusion, and that deals with gender, LGBTQ issues, and all that.
Okay, I think the more questions will come on the introduction. Let's dive straight into this report. The Economic Case for LGBT plus Inclusion in Kenya. And the executive summary of this says, open, inclusive and diverse societies are better for business and better for economic growth. This is true for companies and economies all around the world, including Kenya. This report presents the evidence base that supports this, demonstrating that openness and inclusion can aid Kenya in reaching its economic goals laid out in Vision 2030, and that businesses thrive in tolerant societies. Among the things that you say is you pointed out the current situation in Kenya in terms of policy and legal status. Then you tell us the economic opportunities, and I guess this is where now the newspaper reports pick the figures and say, you know, because of this current situation, the economic opportunities include this. Billions of shillings in terms of opportunity. And the issue of inclusion. What is the purpose of this report? So you've authored the report. What did you want with the report?
Yes. So first, this report was actually commissioned by businesses in Kenya. And what happened was there was a meeting, right, to talk about inclusion, to talk about why inclusion is important. And so businesses said, listen, fine, this you feel is important in your at the global north. But how does it affect Kenya? Like, where is the economic case? Are we even sure there are that many LGBTIQ people living here that it could cause such an effect, such a large economic effect? And so we did the research, and we found, the findings were the amount of money we're losing is in the billions. So the report is to help businesses understand what impact this has to the economy. And it's also to help the government see the impact to the economy. It is not for businesses to withhold their business, because that makes zero business sense. It is just to show that there's this thing that is happening, and it's happening organically. It's not that Microsoft will now say, global Microsoft will now say, let's shut down our Microsoft office in Kenya because they're not inclusive. It's just to show that there's a chunk of money that is being lost due to productivity, due to health, daily health outcomes, due to, different other things that cause people not to be as productive as they can be at work. Yeah.
So now, with the results of this report, is there anything that is being encouraged of these businesses to do? Because there's some figures here that are quite interesting, right? So if you're letting businesses know that 130 billion shillings to 18 billion, for example, 0.2% to 1.2% of the GDP every year costs this is the amount that's being cost, right? LGBT and plus discrimination. As a result of discrimination, this amount of money is being lost every year. What then is the hope that they do with this information? Because they're the ones who commissioned the report, right? This information now then is being given to them. Is there a hope that they do something with this information?
Yes, there's hope that businesses take action.
What action?
Sort of lobby for inclusion, better inclusion. Lobby for penal codes that are harmful and that criminalize same-sex relationships or same-gender relationships, that those laws are repealed.
Okay.
Support civil society organizations that are working on the ground in eliminating some of these penal codes that are actually colonial inheritance.
Okay. Can I come to the inclusion part so that I can be clear here? What kind of inclusion are we talking about? Inclusion in terms of employment, in terms of leadership on corporate level, leadership in state office? What are we looking at?
Inclusion in the country, in our society.
Or recognition even?
Recognition.
Okay.
Inclusion.
So what we're saying then from these numbers is these businesses that have representation in the country lobby for inclusion, lobby for a change, lobby for, decreased levels of discrimination, because we can see, according to this report, that you're losing this amount of money in the country because of this discrimination. Now, if you lobby for it, then are we seeing that 1 + 1 = 2, so that if there's change, we see more of this money coming into the country?
No.
Okay.
The loss of the money is because of productivity, right? Or health, a denial of health, access to health. It's not, like I said, it's not Google refusing to do business in Kenya, because there's no way Google will refuse to do business in Kenya. Microsoft will not refuse to do business in Kenya. It's just that there is more to be gained by being gender inclusive, right? And the same figures, the same methodology that we use is the same methodology that is used to calculate how much Kenya or how much societies are losing because of gender discrimination. So, and the more you include women, the more productive they become in businesses, right? The more you include women in boards, the more businesses thrive, right? It's not that businesses are saying, if you don't have women in your boards, we will not do business here. So it's the same thing for the LGBTIQ inclusion.
Okay.
It's more of productivity, health, access to education, access to equal employment opportunities. That is what these figures are about. And these figures, by the way, are not even like there's more to it because there's very little data on LGBTIQ inclusion because of the discrimination, because of the stigma, because of people not wanting to be, stigmatized. It's very hard to capture LGBTIQ data, right? So when we calculate these figures, we're calculating with the little figures that we have. We're calculating with the
Why
little...
is it very hard to capture? Actually, let's start from there. What is it that you found is the current status of LGBTQ in the country? Is there direct and deliberate exclusion? Or is there just, it's just that we haven't recognized or even refused to recognize? What is the situation?
The situation is...
Because you're talking about inclusion.
Yeah.
Is it, are you saying that there is exclusion?
Yes, there is.
Deliberate?
We've seen this at companies. Yes, deliberate. Sometimes it's covered in other issues. For example, if we have seen a case, unfortunately, legally I can't give names, but I can't be specific. But we've seen people who've actually been fired, but their reasons for being fired is because you were late to work one day.
Right.
But this is because also this person has, been outed or has come out by, through their own free will. We've seen these laws being used to harass the queer community, the LGBTIQ community in Kenya. We've seen people being denied access to health. We've seen people being denied access to education. Just yesterday, I was watching a video of someone who was going to graduate, who was beaten down before he got, I think, to their gate, or before they got to their gate. Sorry for I think I'm using the wrong pronoun. Who got harassed.
If you put it before a verb and then it's followed by a
and
noun.
then it's followed by a noun.
The subject should be noun.
Yeah.
And then we'll have COVID.
But yes, someone was beaten down by a group of boda people, and this was on Instagram, and it's an open channel. Sorry, an open
Forum.
account. Yes. So this person was beaten down by the boda guys. Of course, they knew that this person was queer. They've been going to school, they've been going to university, and that bullying, that harassment, that violence is what we are trying to reduce as much as possible through having allies like the business and private sector.
I'm listening to what you're saying. You see, discrimination, call it arising from homophobia, traditional norms, social norms. It's something that society in its entirety grows up with. Now, what we're referring to is this specific manifestation of it when it comes to the LGBT community. Now, if you're talking about productivity, if somebody doesn't come out, they'll be in a place of employment, they'll be productive, they will continue. Because when you apply for a job, nobody asks you really to tell them what your orientation is, whether you are that entire list, where you belong. Nobody asks you. If you do belong to that community, it may come out in the way you go about your business. But now let me explain to you something that I think perhaps we need to consider. And if you've considered it, you will tell me. Anytime you bring up the subject of LGBT, have I left Q somewhere?
IQ plus.
Yeah, Q plus, and plus. The thing that comes to the mind of most people is sexual orientation. And it goes against the socialized thinking of the vast majority of people. So if you're talking about biases, it raises the heckles. Any issue that somebody may have against bias, it raises it to extremes that you cannot possibly imagine until you actually see it. And part of it is people respond to it as though it's infectious. Now, in many communities, it is taboo. So even talking about it is almost as bad as being identified as somebody belongs to that community. So if I understand you, you're saying that inclusion and tolerance should actually encompass people being able to openly say that this is my orientation, this is where I am. But in so doing, if that is what you're trying to further, you'll be saying that you'll be going against a very interesting traditional norm. We never really go out in the workplaces declaring such things. So, it may
Why?
not appear so, but we don't.
Why don't we?
We just
Because
don't.
it's assumed it's obvious. If you're a man, you are heterosexual.
It
if you're a
is
woman, you're
assumed,
heterosexual.
But also, it goes further than that. Why I brought in the concept, the aspect of sexual orientation. As Africans, we do not really easily discuss sex openly. Just discussing it. Even among people who are married, it is not a subject that is discussed openly. Sex is something that we assume takes place in the dark, preferably under a blanket, already in the dark. So when you now want to discuss it, and you want to discuss it in a form that we are not accustomed to, then you really do have an uphill task, don't you?
You know, I want to ask, when I say lesbian, gay, bisexual, why does your mind go to sex? If you come and introduce me, you come and say, this is my wife. I don't think about what you're doing in bed.
Because
And that is also one of the ways in which you come out in the
Yes.
office, which is very normal. You say, this is my wife.
no,
When
no,
you write
I
down
am
on your
married. You
insurance,
write, I am married or
I am married.
single.
When you fill your insurance form, you fill so and dependents, wife, children. How does a queer person fill in their dependents at the workplace?
I mean, your sexual orientation.
You tell us, how do they do it?
But if you have dependents, you have
You
dependents.
have dependence. Doesn't matter if you're queer or not.
Is it-
If somebody's depending
Who's a
on you.
queer person?
Yeah.
How, a queer person?
Yeah.
So queer is an umbrella term to describe, I use queer to describe just the LGBTIQ
Okay.
community.
Okay.
So when you speak to insurance companies in Kenya, it is very hard for, let's say, like queer organizations to get covered. I actually know of only one Kenyan company that will actually offer insurance to the queer organizations that are in Kenya, that are working, that, you know, have the name lesbian or are known to work on LGBTIQ issues. There's only one, health. Now, the other thing is the only other people who cover this is international insurance companies, your Allianz, your Bupa, and all that. Because those are insurance companies. I mean, those are global companies. Here in Kenya, if you ask,
Muthoni,
all
what
these
journey
other-
did they go through to arrive at this point where we can now refer to them as examples where they accommodate these differences? Did they not go through a long process before they got here?
yes, through the work of the queer community, through these discussions that we're having now.
Yes. Now, what I'm trying to say is, even as we have this discussion, why I was a bit verbose about it is, there are considerations that if you are blind to, the very introduction of the subject will actually receive or will end up with unintended consequences. If you want to introduce a subject that goes contrary to norms that people have internalized, this is not a good or bad situation, just norms that people are accustomed to, and you want to introduce it, what I was describing for you is how people look at it. And it doesn't matter what you say, it all goes back to sex. And what people internalize is these are people, the word, that's why I actually thought the word queer was no longer used, but these are people who are not normal. They're not regular people. They have odd habits. And this is now me being polite about it. Okay? So now, if that is the way people see it, an introduction to understanding that these people are actually not odd, they're actually not even queer. This just happens to be their orientation. Yes, you may not know so, but it is. For most people, they think it's an infection. It's a disease that somebody has acquired and they need to be cured of it. Now, how do you get someone to understand that it's actually not that at all?
By the work we're doing, by bringing economic cases like this, by showing it's not just about what I do in my bed, which is not where your mind should be, which is that for me is a you problem. Thinking about what I do in my bedroom
my
is,
dear.
is the other person's perspective.
Allow me to just halt you right there. The reality of anything, the moment it touches on sex, just that, you actually have no control over how somebody is going to respond to it. And especially now when it involves human beings and it goes against what they consider to be norm. Oh, that's it.
When we were discussing this on Monday here, Muthoni, we looked at it from these approaches. Yes, there are people in this country who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, I, Q, they're plus in this country. They could be going through all this discrimination and exclusion, right? There's also the issue of the society understanding and getting to understand, come to grips with what is happening. Because whenever you talk about somebody, you're talking about somebody who has a parent, who has siblings, who has cousins, who has workmates, who has friends. Okay? Do those people understand what it means that someone says they're lesbian? Do the parents understand? Do the siblings understand? Do the uncles and aunties understand what does that mean to
Are
be
they
lesbian?
even willing to understand it?
Yeah. There's that side of getting people to understand. And then there's the other side of the Western world having gone through that curve slowly over very many years, decades, coming to a point where they're now beginning to understand. And now because they're beginning to understand, they start making it appear like everybody now in the world should understand. Because that's how it's taken in these parts of the world. That this is a Western concept that is being pushed down our throats. When Western organizations, human rights lobbies, Western governments talk about, these African countries and the way they have very strict laws which are oppressive and they go against human rights ideals, and this is what should be happening to them. What happens to those countries? They're hearing you telling them how they should run their business. When you see organizations such as the ones that you're saying are members of Open for Business, and you look at the organizations, Accenture, BCG, Brunswick, KPMG, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Google, and the others, and Standard Chartered, you're thinking these are companies combined, they actually are bigger than many African countries in terms of GDP. In terms of how much they bring to the economy. So they could be doing this softly by, just showing the business case for, the LGBTIQ community and inclusion, the business case. But how it's translated is you are trying to force us to go a certain direction. Are you seeing where the issue now starts arising? Is it imposition of a position? Or is it you trying to bring me on board to understand, to go through the same journey that you went through?
It's taking a journey together. I'm not saying that because there's this report and because there's work on the ground that you're going to change your mind immediately. But it's been a gradual change. Like I think on Monday someone was saying that there's a time that these discussions would not be had. There's a time that gender inclusion was unheard of in Kenya because it became a patriarchal continent. There's a time that disability inclusion was not had. People never had ramps. But those are conversations that are starting. So should we wait to go through all those years that America and Europe went through to get to where we need to be? Should we have waited for 70 plus years to get ramps for people with disabilities?
Nope.
Should we have waited 100 years to get women in boards?
That's
no.
a completely different discussion, to be honest.
No. Inclusion is inclusion, right?
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Tell me why it's not.
You see, inclusion that has an organic process, organic in the sense that it is pushed, but there's an internal pushing. We were talking before this particular program about our new constitution, okay? There were players outside the country who helped us push the agenda. But the players who won so consistently were local people.
Yep.
People who were known, politicians. So the entire issue of the constitution was embraced easily because people felt this is ours. Yet, the very process of even getting it written, experts, we had help from very many people outside this particular country. But the optics was that it was us who pushed the agenda. So it is our constitution. And that's why we talk about it, because we own it. Now, we are talking about something that people push for because they felt they wanted the change. We are now talking about understanding members of our community who happen to be different from very many others, and simply saying that they ought to be recognized for who they are and accepted and included. There is a problem because what they represent is something that the communities that we have avoided accepting for the longest time, even acknowledging. So you now want them to accept it because, as Eric puts it, other people have accepted it. Unfortunately, a conversation that starts from "it has been accepted here, so you ought to," because that's what it's seen as, that, my friend, will meet with more opposition than it will meet with acceptance.
The point here is understanding some of the factors that are impeding your work of creating awareness and sensitization on matters of the queer community, as you say. One of them is the way it's packaged. It appears as if it's somebody else's agenda that is being brought and being pushed, and you're being told, take it up as your agenda today. Okay? So let's take a break at 26 minutes to 10 o'clock. We have Yvonne Muthoni in the studio. She is the country director of Open for Business. Open for Business is an alliance of very many global companies that come together, and they're pushing the idea of inclusion. Inclusion here specifically being for members of LGBTIQ+, lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, plus others. They just released a report called The Economic Case for LGBT plus Inclusion in Kenya, talking about inclusion of members of the LGBTIQ plus community. And this report basically looks at what is the current situation in the country, policy-wise, legal-wise, in terms of the community and social aspects of it. And then what is the economic opportunity that inclusion represents. So it's approaching it from the angle of how much farther could we be if we had a more inclusive society. And inclusion here is not on gender, inclusion is not on ability, inclusion here is on matter of, so this is sexuality, isn't it? Is it? Is it?
Sexual orientation.
Sexual
yes.
orientation. It just got to be clear. And talks about, the every year LGBT plus discrimination costs Kenya 130 billion to 18 billion shillings. There's a lot of figures that have been put here. When Kenyans hear this and they see these companies are all global companies, and we are not seeing a local company here called Muthoni and company being part of it, it appears it's companies from the Western world that have come together and they are pushing a certain agenda. That, you know what? Because you don't have this, we could have invested a lot more. You could have gained a lot more. And you're not gaining a lot more because you're not including members of this community in everyday life. So it appears to be an agenda that's being driven from outside and not one that is homegrown.
I think the issue here is that you're looking at it like it's a thing that is being offered and being taken away if you don't do this other thing.
Yes.
And that is not what it is. This is about productivity. You cannot, you can only build on my productivity, right?
Yep.
But if you oppress me, the productivity lowers. That is what the issue is.
Okay, let's
I'm not
break it down,
saying,
Muthoni,
hold on,
yeah.
I'm not saying that Mimi, as Microsoft, I will not do business with you unless, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying my employees are not as productive as they could be because the environment is oppressive. And unless you're sitting at an office as an LGBTIQ person, you cannot say that there's no oppression. You cannot say that just be productive. No one will ask you whether you're gay or bi or whatever, because there is, if I as a woman feel that this company is not going to give me the same rights or the same equal opportunities in advancement, will I be happy working for that company? I'll just be like, hey, when is end of month so that I can make my money and leave? When is Friday reaching so that I can just bounce out of this office?
Okay. So if we're breaking it up, because again, the way in which people who are consuming this information are understanding it is the previous, right? So break it down. You have companies mushroomed around the country, organizations, whatever it may be, and we are saying that people who fall within the LGBT community who work in these organizations are being discriminated against, and as a result of that, you're losing out in terms of your productivity as an organization, which essentially then adds up to the national cake. So what you're saying is, if you had laws, if you had codes which are more accepting of these individuals, it would not change attitudes toward these individuals in companies? Would the laws change, and then people within these corporates then change the way in which they approach people who work there? How would it? Because I'm trying to be very practical now, and I'm saying, all right, let's assume that the penal code then is altered, it's changed. Let's assume now that it's an open and there is a blanket law, there's a blanket statement on the country, and it says, you know what, now we need to have more inclusive ways of how we're going to do things. Everybody fall in line in terms of this. And we say, all right, how is it going to change these individual approaches culturally, traditionally, towards individuals who work in these organizations? Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're
because
saying.
you could have a boss who's traditional and doesn't really care. Let the penal code change. For all I care, this is the way I feel. How am I going to change it?
Yeah.
That's the line, I think, for me, that is very difficult to traverse.
So the thing is, there's a lot of work that goes into advancing queer rights. The economic angle is not the only angle that is happening in this country. There are organizations that work on sensitizing companies. There are companies actually reaching out to some of these organizations, including Open for Business, for diversity and inclusion talks, including discussing LGBTIQ issues. There's different ways in which we are sensitizing the public as opposed to just going to companies and other organizations. There's the billboards that you've seen around. Love is equal, love is free, there's all these things that are going around. So there's sensitization. There's a point where in this country, again, I go back to that this discussion was not being had. But because of the consistency of the queer movement, because of the consistency of our allies, our friends, then we've gotten to a place where these discussions are being had, and we'll get to a place where the larger group of our society will be more accepting. Yeah.
Have you assessed? You said you've sensitized. Do you have data that can give you an indication as to whether your sensitization is effective, whether it is appropriate, whether it is getting to where you want it to go?
This right here is proof that conversations have been going on. Us having a discussion at this radio station is proof that there's work that has been going on, right? You could have taken this to VOK in 1980.
That's very, very true. The fact that the conversations are happening at such platforms shows that the conversations are happening. How do you measure the effectiveness of these conversations? Because ultimately what you want people to change their behavior and their mindsets.
So let me give an example of a company, not mention him. Company X had their first diversity and inclusion LGBTIQ discussion, let's say last year. When they had the second conversation, because the staff of that company X went out and said, you know what, that conversation was actually interesting. I'm beginning to understand things. And I'm beginning to understand how these laws are being used to harass. I'm beginning to understand how my jokes about queer people is affecting my colleague. More people came for the second. And the third, there was even more people. So that ripple effect happens. And that's one of the ways in which we see this sensitization talks happen, making an impact. The other thing is, when there's a time when you'd say something LGBTIQ positive on social media, and the flurry of homophobia that would follow you would be immense. But now we're seeing more and more, and I'm just mentioning things that are, visible and not programmatic within organizations. The flurry of support now that is coming to dispel the homophobic insults and harassment on social media, you can see from there that there's an improvement. The fact that we fought against, what was the movie called? Rafiki. Was allowed to air, even if it was allowed to air just so that it can be confirmed for was it Globe?
The Cannes.
Oscars.
The Cannes Film Festival.
Cannes Film yeah, anyway. No, it was the Oscars. I think it was the Oscars. Anyway, yes. The fact that we were able to have, or Rafiki was able to be aired, that means that the fight or the struggle for inclusion is progressing. Yeah.
What challenges is this struggle encountering?
Off the bat, it's the misconception that, first of all, I think there's always this narrative on media, especially traditional media, that, fabric of society, marriage, it's just about repealing laws, morality. It's just about repealing laws that are harmful, laws that are used to harass.
Would repealing the law change those things that you've said? Fabric of the society, morality. Yeah. It's all about how people think and perceive things. So even if you had a law, so today it's a penal code that criminalizes same-sex,
then it's decriminalized.
Same-sex, same-gender sex.
Eric, can I chime in here and just give a live example? 2/3 gender rule.
It's in the Constitution.
It's there.
Yes, it is.
In black, white, and probably...
Parliament is at risk of being dissolved today because of the fact that they have not enacted it.
Yes.
If you went around the country, do people feel that this is a big issue? That, yes, indeed, we have fallen short of our own Constitution.
But you see, the thing is, like you said, Parliament is at the point of almost being dissolved today.
Yeah.
Because there's a law that supports the 2/3 gender rule, right?
And do you see anything magnanimous happening as a result of that threat?
I mean...
Here's the thing. If Parliament was dissolved
but there's
today,
that...
it's true. We're talking about law versus attitudes. Do laws impact attitudes? If Parliament were to be dissolved today, and even Speaker Justin Muthoni posed that and he appeared to be joking, but it was a real question. If we dissolve Parliament today and we went to an election, do you have any guarantee that the voter will elect more women? Because their mind has changed.
But there is a law that will be protecting, that will be protective, right? And if I'm harassed because of my sexual orientation, I will have more confidence to say, this has happened, and this is what the law says about this thing happening. It's, there's a law against people stealing, right?
Yep.
But they'll still come to your house and steal.
That
is illegal.
Is there a law that bans you from declaring your sexual orientation in this country?
No, there's no law that declares me.
Is there a law that bans you from, practicing, even if you're not having sex?
There is a law that bans same-sex acts.
Yes.
And by the way, that law also bans heterosexual sex.
Same-sex
in the
acts.
Same spirit.
And you told us this whole conversation about LGBTIQ is not only about sex.
Yes.
So the law, the penal code criminalizes same-sex acts, but it doesn't ban you from doing anything else, from even coming out and saying, you know what, I'm lesbian, I'm bisexual, I'm intersex. It doesn't.
I think, so the issue is that the law is used to harass
But I was
and
heading
deny
to a
people
point.
employment, and deny people economic gain, and deny people financial gain.
People find it hard to come out and say, I'm lesbian, I'm gay. Why? It's not because the law, you're going to be arrested because you said I'm lesbian.
Somebody's going to harass you.
No.
It is because of how...
It is.
It's the stigma.
We have a case
Can
right now.
you be arrested for saying you're lesbian?
We have a case. It can be used against me because also we're in the country we are in, without saying much, it can be used. We have people right now who've been arrested.
It
Simply
can be,
because
it can be,
and it has been used to arrest LGBTQ people because
Muthoni, we're discussing stigma, really. Okay. Do you know why it is people in this country in Africa embraced the girl child's education? It wasn't one issue. It was a multiplicity of issues. But what would carry the day was the understanding that the very thing that you're saying, a girl child being educated had very positive economic effects on a family structure. A girl child's education. But in addition to that, women pushed that agenda. They pushed it to the point where now it's men who are saying, you know something, the disadvantaged individual here is the boy child, not even the girl child. Okay? You go to the employment sector, an employer, in many instances, and from a research perspective, they prefer to employ women. Why? They make better employees. They don't give you industrial issues. With the aspect of pregnancy, which can be managed, they don't. They make far, far better. It's understood, it's even accepted. But does it stop the discrimination? The answer is no. But it reduces it significantly.
Yes.
So the stigma that educating a girl child and everything that went with it has disappeared over time, or has dissipated over time because of the organic nature of it. Now, what am I saying? Remember when Eric talked about the optics and how whatever we're doing is perceived? We're telling you a document such as this one, not what it means, what it intends, what it purposes, how it is perceived is that we are being told perception. All these big shots are telling us that, you know something, we are, yes, and so you had better. No one is telling you they won't do business with you, but perception, it's implied. Now, unfortunately, the implication and perception here will form the basis of the reality that people approach this whole matter with. And remember, yes, go ahead, please.
I think, and this is what we're doing here. We're trying to discuss this economic report and trying to dispel the notion that companies are saying you had better. That is what we're doing in this conversation.
Okay.
And that is what you do. When a report comes out, of course, there'll be naysayers and yesayers. The thing is, just to clarify, is, we're having this conversation to clarify.
These are not conditionalities being set by these companies.
Productivity is not a conditionality. If I come and tell you, I'll be more comfortable if you sat 1 meter away from me because Corona, I'm more comfortable like that.
Right.
It's a condition.
Muthoni,
That makes...
it doesn't matter how much,
No,
how
that's
you
not...
say it or how loudly you say it. You see, there's a point that we would like you to understand. Huh? It's really very simple. It's not that we don't understand what you're saying. We actually do. And it's not that if you say it, the general public will not understand what you're saying. They actually will. These are powerhouses, okay? And unfortunately, the stigma associated with colonialism has not ended in this continent.
No, it's not.
We are still dependent on World Bank, God knows who else. So every time you bring this up and these names come up, guess what?
It's the new thing happening all over. It's the same
Yes.
thing happening all over
But this
again.
is why
but
the
at a different
conversation
time.
needs to keep going. The conversation needs to keep going.
There's a point I'm trying to make here. There is a social approach to such matters that, in my mind, would be far more powerful than the economic one.
And those strategies are being used. Those strategies are being used.
Behavior change intervention has to do with changing the way somebody looks at something. And in changing it, you then change their behavior. So the question I want to ask you is, what are these behavior change interventions that, yes, what do you think will be achieved? A document such as this one, well documented, has the facts, has the data. How do you think that this will change the way people think? This.
The arguments usually are the rhetoric about what politicians have said or the religious leaders have said or all that. That's usually, or whatever is out there about our culture. That these conversations brings another angle to why LGBTIQ inclusion is important. It brings the economic angle. And there are people who've looked at this report and thought, hey, actually,
There's a case here.
there's a case here. There's a case here and there's an issue here. Yeah. And it might not be everybody.
I hear what you're saying, that this is just one
It's just
column.
one angle.
In a multi-columned building.
Yes.
Okay, so this
There's
is one.
repeal, there's sensitization, there's access to sexual reproduction. All these things are happening. It's not it's not what we are stuck on one thing
One
and that's
little
the only
box.
thing we're
Yes,
seeing.
yes.
There's many other things that are going on.
And the question we asked, which hasn't been answered, is how effective are these things? Okay, let me ask
I
you.
think I answered that question.
No, for me
I
to
think I
ask it,
answered.
for
I
me-
said, and this was my answer.
You give an
Had we
anecdotal
not-
answer.
had
so
we
you,
not,
you haven't been able to actually go out and
Mm-hmm.
qualitatively say and quantitatively say this
And
is
measure the impact.
this
Okay, let me
is the
give you a few.
impacts.
The case that was won against anal testing, the case that was won against the NGO board for registration of LGBTIQ organizations having the name lesbian gay.
Okay.
There's access to sexual reproductive health care, and all this. Yeah, those are
So there have been
off
movements.
top of the mind.
There have
So
been
they've
movements.
been.
We're coming to the conclusion of the show, and we want to thank you for coming and enlightening us and having this conversation with us. Speak to people, okay? People who, when they hear LGBTIQ, they go back into their conceptions and misconceptions. What one message would you tell them?
Sorry, please.
What one message would you tell people when they hear homosexual acts? They cringe. What would you tell them?
Think about being more inclusive. Think about the fact that this is not a fight to take away from you. This is not a struggle to take away from you. This is a struggle for equal employment, equal opportunities to education, to healthcare, to I'm a citizen, to enjoying my freedoms, to enjoying my dignity to life. That is what this is about. It's not about taking away from you. It's about giving me the same things that you have as a human being and as a citizen of the country.
Asante sana. Thank you, Yvonne Muthoni, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yvonne is the country director for Open for Business, and we've been discussing the whole issue of inclusion in Kenya.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.